right, so that moves us along to number 9 on our agenda, which is our superintendent's report. I will turn it over to Dr. Ross.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board and our community. It is an honor that we recognize our teachers. As we said in our strategic plan, that to accomplish mid-50s on your median growth percentiles would be good. That 60 would be very good. 70 would be excellent. 80 is amazing. What you just saw is the growing season in true effect, with 41 teachers moving the average, the median child in that class, to 90 on that. That just shows the amazing work of all of our teachers in our district. But that is just extraordinary growth that we're seeing. As always, we are a system guided by 3 critical questions. Why do we do this work? How do we accomplish that why? And what are the outcomes? Our vision is that we love and grow students. And as you can see from those are the faces behind the work every day, our teachers are growing our students. We do that by staying focused on academic, social, emotional growth and development. We have an umbrella of protection for our students, everything from physical safety, physical health, mental health, their social needs, behavioral, academic needs, so that we can see this academic and educational success. We measure love and grow with our performance goals of school climate, teacher administrative quality, student achievement, and gifted and talented strategies. This leads us to our growing season. If we compare our MAP results, measures of academic progress from last fall to this fall, we are seeing that growth in the number of students who are not on grade level who are now on grade level. That's the movement that we're seeing from our teachers and students. And so now the winter results are out. The winter MAP results are back. This is last year's winter MAP results. Again, if we were to take the SC Ready today, this would be, and last year's, the results. This is where we are a year later. While we all recognize that there is work to be done, we have to pause and thank the work that we have brought thus far. That's amazing growth and changing those red bars to blue bars. Each percentage represents a name behind that number and a story behind that name. In our secondary, we're seeing by January 11th, 85% of our seniors of that graduating cohort are on track to graduate. We made a goal of 90.5% this year, and so we're working each and every day again to find what are those challenges that we can work out for those students. We met with our student advisory this week, and they said, Dr. Ross, how many students are in that 5%? And Dr. Harris did the math for it. It comes down to 70 students, about 70 students. When they looked at it, they said, you know, we break this out by schools, it's about 23 students a school. So even the students say, we may can help by being examples and mentors for that. So it's all hands on deck to find the stories behind those 77 students so that we can meet our goal. So that's what we mean by it's more than just numbers. It's the names and the stories behind those numbers. If we look at the measures that we have in our district for academic growth, we've seen growth in every category with the exception of grad rate, which is maintained from the last year. Again, it's encouraging of the work that we see in our teachers, our students, our families, and our staff, and very proud of the growing season here at School District 5. And at that, I'll bring us to our monthly financials, and I'll ask our CFO, Ms. Madison Wilkerson, to come forth with the monthly financials for November.
Thank you for inviting me here tonight to present the November financial report. We'll start with our revenue summary. Revenue through November 30th was approximately $74.2 million, or 31.96% of the budget of $232 million. Looking at local sources first, vehicle taxes certainly still remain strong fiscal year to date. Of course, still waiting on large payments from the counties for our real estate taxes in December, January, and February. Additionally, our state revenue is on target compared to budget. You will notice that the district did receive the Tier 1 payment in November this year. This is normally received in December, so this was certainly a nice windfall of $9.5 million that was received slightly earlier than is usually in this time frame. Looking at other financing sources, they are also in line with the budget year to date. So again, overall revenue is about $74.2 million year to date. Moving on to the expenditure summary through November 30th. Expenditures through that time frame were about $78.3 million, or 33.73% of budget, which is, as you can see, very similar to the same percentage for the same time period last year. Again, you will notice that expenditures are about $4 million over revenue through this time frame. Again, very, very normal for the fall for us, but actually a little better than most years due to that. Thankful for that early Tier 1 payment on the revenue side. I did want to take just a moment to talk to y'all about, if you go to kind of your detail pages that are in your packet, and just point you to the adjustment column. So when we talk later on about the budget transfer policy, that's actually where any transfers will be made. So you can see we don't necessarily have any from a revenue standpoint, but if you go over to the expenditures side, you will see that there have been some transfers already occurring. Again, under that $10,000 threshold from that policy. But in the future, that's exactly where they will be if we move forward with that policy. So I just wanted to point your eyes to that. But I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Ms. Huddle?
Last time you talked about the transfers that were necessary for the substitute, and I was wondering if you could just maybe explain that in a little bit more detail, like where is the substitute originally budgeted, and how do you decide how much and where to move it?
Yes, so if you look, again, in your detail pages for the expenditures, so function 149, so the way that this is laid out, so the first three numbers are your fund, so that's 100, and then it's a period, and then the next three numbers are your function. So function 149, and the purchase services, you'll notice a budget of $3.1 million. And if you look at how much has actually been spent, it really doesn't look like we spent very much. And that's because what we do from our standpoint is we have a purchase order that we put in each year for that encumbrance to make sure that we encumber those funds. And then when the invoices actually come in, they are for various different schools, they're for various different grade levels, so the function is different from that 149. So, if I'm substituting for a kindergarten classroom, then the function needs to be function 111. So I would need to move the budget for that substitute to function 111, so out of 149 to 111. So it needs to be in line with where the expenditures are actually charged.
So do you move it just to the other function, to kindergarten, for example, or do you move it to individual schools?
I would propose that we move it to individual schools. So we have not moved it thus far because of the policy, but I would propose that we would move it to the schools and, to both the function and the school.
If you were to move it to the schools, how would you know, like if a teacher is already budgeted and they had leave, and so there was really no more expense going to be incurred, I mean, how would you know when to move it and when? Sometimes you would incur additional, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes their salary would absorb it. So how would you know when to move it and when not to move it if you moved it to schools?
I think we would, have to do that kind of over time, because at the end of the day, your budget should really be in line with what you actually spend. By the end of the year, by June 30th, your budget should be pretty close to what you actually spend. So if we do that monthly transfer, it may be multiple times that we're doing it. It wouldn't be just a one-time move that I'm then allocating. One school gets an extra $200,000. It would be based on what is actually spent, and then over time, you can start budgeting for that.
So is that the only time that you move money based on what's actually spent is for the substitutes, or is there some other times that money's moved for what's actually spent?
Well, no, that would probably be I don't want to say definitively that would be, but that's probably one of the main times that I can think of. I mean, most of the time the budget is moved ahead of time when we know, okay, we need to move this because we have, unable to hire that vacancy. We're going to have to outsource that through a contractor. So we then would move the budget prior to. But substitutes is one of those things that is very hard to budget on the front end. So that's why we've always budgeted in one pot and really have never moved it. But the problem with that is when we get to the audit time, in October, and we look at our budget to actuals at the end of the audit, that is part of that report, it looks like our budgets are so off. And so from that standpoint, it does need to be adjusted to go to the correct functions. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Wilkerson.
Thank you.
So as we talk about budgets, we are in budget season. We're getting ready to, once we get our projections and our revenue estimates, we'll start bringing together budget priorities. But I'd like to go over 3 items of administrative priorities for the budget for 2024-25. Those 3 are teacher retention and recruitment, sunset of ESSER funding, and the 5-year facility rezoning plan. These are really kind of primers of this presentation, just to outline some of the priorities that we have for our upcoming budget. The Center for Educator Recruitment, Retention, and Advancement, CERA, since 2001, has issued a report on it's the annual Educator Supply and Demand Report. I encourage you to review this. I would like to highlight that on average, more than 7,000 educators in South Carolina districts leave their teaching position each year. So the last 3 years, that can account for 21,000 teachers. In 1 year, I think it was up as high as 8,000. What's interesting in that report is that we see of the current teaching force, where people are coming from, 17% of the teachers that we are hiring are actually coming from teacher education programs. The majority of the teachers that we are hiring are coming from other districts within the state, and 13% from other states. So the pool of teachers is shrinking. As a result, we are looking at what is our employee value proposition? What draws teachers to School District 5 of Lexington and Richland counties? We did an article study on what companies get wrong about managing talent. And in that article, it aligned that organizations need to do well in 4 imperatives, 4 areas. Material offerings, so that's pay and materials that we have, equipment, but also growth and development, opportunities for growth, connection and community, meaning and purpose. And so we've asked that our teachers of the year from each of our schools, they did this article as well, that worked in workshops and came up with ideas for each one of these quadrants, things that we can include in this year's budget. So as we continue to work with our faculty advisory on these areas, you will see that we will bring to the board in our budget proposals items that we'll have in these 4 areas for approval. Next, we want to prepare for the sunset of ESSER. If you can remember, with the CARES Act, this country, for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, that was $2.3 trillion that this nation received. Funny fact, which is hard to fathom, if you count it to 1 trillion by ones, it'd take you thousands of years to do that. These are huge numbers. Of the $2.3 trillion that the nation received, the state of South Carolina received almost $10 billion in relief. Of that, $3.3 billion went to schools. Of the $3.3 billion or 3.26 billion, School District 5 received $23.3 million. All of these funds will no longer, we will no longer have access after September 30th and before. By law, they have to be expended by September 30th, 2024. That's an average of $7.7 million a year for the last 3 years. So as we look at our priorities, we know that schools are facing this ESSER shortfall, and so one of the priorities of as we go into this budget season is how do we continue the excellence, continue the growth, continue the programs without the ESSER funding. What were we using the funds for? Well, in the ESSER 3 outline, there were 15 different categories. Of the 15 different categories, we used 12 of those that you can see here. I won't read them all. But this was to the benefit of our school district and a lot of school districts around the nation, that you had this flexibility to use those funds there. So as that elapses, then we have to make very prepared decisions and very difficult decisions on how we move forward with the excellence, the amazing growth that we have, while maintaining the operational effectiveness. And then last, as we look at the funding priorities, is the 5-year facilities and rezoning plan. We have talked about this plan, and we're going to continue to work through. The board has given us some directions on some clarifications that we will provide, and we look forward to whether it's discussion or workshop to go through this. But just as a highlight, our recommendation is financing a fix and field plan for School District 5. And if we look at our current outline, our current situation, this is our current educational structure. It's very unique, and the reality is we can't stay this way. You know, why change? I always start out with the critical question, why? Why can't we stay this way? Well, our current structure has 3 drawbacks. One, the instructional effectiveness. We're probably one of the only places where one school, and they do an amazing job, but they pull in from 10 different communities for 1 year and then send those students back out to 2 different schools. This is a model that we need to put that school in the right area, in the right situation. The next reason is our growth. South Carolina is one of the fastest growing states in the country. Out of the counties in South Carolina that are growing, Lexington and Richland County are in the top 10 fastest growing counties. Lexington at number 6, Richland at number 10. If you refer to our September the 11th report from MPS, we saw that there are increases projected for IRMO and very fast increases of population growth in Chapin. However, we saw a dip in the Dutch Fork area. So the question, how do we relieve the growth in Chapin? If you see Piney Woods, Lake Murray Elementary, Chapin Elementary, these schools at or approaching their max capacities. Chapin Intermediate School, at or approaching. Chapin Middle School, at or approaching. Chapin High School. As these schools fill, how do we relieve that pressure? So our plan is to look at where we see the population dips. The population dips are in the Dutch Fork area. As we have room in the Dutch Fork area, we would like to take Ballantyne Elementary School, which is currently serving the Dutch Fork zone, and move it into the Chapin zone. Again, taking Ballantyne Elementary, which currently serves the Dutch Fork zone, and move it into the Chapin zone. What's important to us as we do any rezoning is we know the commitment that families make when they move to go to a certain school. And we know that rezoning is never fun and is very disruptive. As a result, our plan, in this plan, 99% of the students, the area that they are in now, will feed the same high school that they're currently in. They will not be rezoned out of their high school. The only students where this is not the case are those students who live around Ballantyne Elementary. So how are we doing this? The building of Ballantyne will serve the Chapin community, but the students in Ballantyne will be rezoned to Oak Point, River Springs, Dutch Fork Elementary, H.E. Corley. By by moving those students out, you have a building that is now empty to receive Chapin students. When you do that, we can create this model. In this model, we can bring 5th grade down into the elementary schools in Chapin. All of our elementary schools will have K through 5. As a result, we now can relieve pressure in the middle schools by not having 3 middle schools, but now 5 middle schools. The current CIS would return to its original Chapin Middle School. The current Chapin Middle School would move to Spring Hill Middle School. Dutch Fork Middle School would receive more space because it would only feed from 3 schools, 3 elementary schools, Oak Point, River Springs, and Dutch Fork Elementary. Crossroads would move from an intermediate school of 1 grade to a middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And Irmo Middle will feed in from 3 schools, Irmo Elementary, Harbison West, and Seven Oaks. By moving to the 5 middle school model, we now are able to relieve the pressure of the middle school growth in Chapin. Now, what about the high schools? Again, 99% of the students keep their high school. We would suggest that we create space in Spring Hill to relieve the pressure from Chapin High. To do that, we would like to take the current Dutch Fork Elementary School, build a new Dutch Fork Elementary School, so that in that current space of Dutch Fork Elementary, we can relieve pressure or space at Spring Hill, fully maximize the use of Irmo High School, and remove the 5 program from Piney Woods. Those 3 programs would go into the current location of Dutch Fork Elementary, which is actually a school that hasn't been in our community since 1968, the Rich Lakes School. We propose to call it the Rich Lakes Education Center. So this is, in short, our plan. I know that tonight is not part of the discussion agenda, but we are going to seek input. As we discussed in our last meeting, we have a community feedback schedule that we'll be putting out as we talk about this. But our goal is addressing the growth that we see in Chapin, and the third issue that we have are the facility needs that we see in Dutch Fork and Irmo. So with all of this, our proposal is to move from this zoning map to this zoning map within our 5-year plan. Now, as always, the question is, well, how do we pay for it? Well, we're very fortunate in our position that without raising the millage rate, using our existing debt service collections, we could issue up to $240 million of referendum debt. This, again, as a reminder, allows us to go over the state cap of 8% on our debt service obligations in order to address all of the fixing issues that we have in the schools, but also to move forward with the construction that we would need in order to make that plan work. So just as a primer or outline, is that we would like to use February and March to really get community feedback. We know they have only one meeting in April, but we would use the lion's share of February and March to speak to the community, get feedback so that we can come back to this body and really get into the nuts and bolts of the plan. Ideally, pending a successful bond resolution in November, we need 18 months of building, in order to create the spaces that we would need in order to make the move. This move, which is important to know, is that this rezoning would not take place until 26-27. However, moving students to a building, they need teachers, they need programs, they need services. And so we would use the 25-26 school year for that transition. So with that, I know that's a lot, and so I'm going to pause here to take any questions about any part of the superintendent's report.
Okay, Dr. Ross, I actually have a question that I'm going to ask first, if that's all right, regarding the Spring Hill and Chapin High School rezoning conversations, and when you are going out and seeking input from the community. I don't know if this is something that you can ask, but one of the things that I think of when I'm thinking about how the model works, and one of the concerns that we've heard over the last few years is the concerns of Chapin High Schools being very close to capacity. And it's my understanding that that would be alleviated under this plan because there would be more availability at Spring Hill as a magnet for students to go to Spring Hill. And I think that you've said before, like that number is 300 students. I may be making that up, but that number may be wrong. But something like that, where there's a certain number of students that we're hoping will go to the magnet school at Spring Hill, which will relieve the overcrowding situation at Chapin High School. And that's all assuming that Spring Hill is still a magnet. So my question would be, as we're looking at this, is that realistic to think that the number of students we would want to go into the magnet program at Spring Hill from the Chapin school, from Chapin, because Spring Hill, there's a lot of different, all of those high schools feed into Spring Hill. So out of Chapin High School, do we have that interest in 26, 27?
Very good question. Yes,
that would be a question. I mean, you may not have that answer, but
yeah, and I want to share just for framing that, because that is a big part on this plan hinges. Let me talk about the considerations and why we came to that plan. And I'm looking at Dr. Harris to correct me when I'm wrong, but the first plan is to rezone Chapin into Dutch Fork. But that would break our promise of people keeping their high school. And so when families moved, they said, my child would eventually go to Chapin. We were able to keep that for 99%. If we rezone Chapin into Dutch Fork, it would be breaking that promise. So the question was, before we go to that resort, are there some other alternatives? The next alternative was to turn Spring Hill into a traditional zone school. Considering what Spring Hill is today, rated the #1 magnet school in the state, that was also a last resort for me as well. I wanted to protect that Spring Hill, what they call the Spring Hill Way, as much as possible. And so what that left us with was, what could we do at Spring Hill Middle? None of the seats, I'm looking at Dr. Harris to correct me, none of the Irma and Dutch Fork seats that go into Spring Hill would diminish, correct?
That is correct. Those numbers will not change significantly at all.
So the only thing that we're doing is for the wing that we would create, the wing that currently is occupied by the Academy for Success, every seat that wing produces would go to the Spring Hill feeder program that would be at Spring Hill Middle. And so what Dr. Lofton and Principal Dr. Huckabee are working on is that feeder program from Spring Hill Middle to Spring Hill High. It's not zoned, but it's kind of akin to our Escalores and Irmo, a middle to high school program.
So are you saying that any student that goes to Chapin, the Chapin Middle and Spring Hill Middle could go to Spring Hill Middle in a magnet program at Spring Hill Middle that
That's
would
right.
feed into Spring Hill High School?
It would be able to
So
feed
anyone in
into
the Chapin cluster could go to Spring Hill Middle School in that magnet program?
If you're in that magnet school, you have a magnet program, or we would call it a choice because we didn't get funds for it. If you can
Right,
speak
I
to
did
it.
want to make certain for all who are listening that we are speaking about Spring Hill Middle and not Chapin Middle. So there's a direct feed from Spring Hill Middle into Spring Hill High School, but not the Chapin Middle as it will be known as.
Right, but to like adjust the numbers at Spring Hill Middle School, what if you don't have the students that want to be in the feeder program at Spring Hill Middle School and they want to go to Chapin High School and not Spring Hill High School?
Very good.
So my question when I asked about Chapin Middle School would be, would anybody in the Chapin cluster in the middle school arena that would all feed into Chapin High School anyways, would they all be eligible to be in the choice program at Spring Hill Middle School?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so because of the numbers that we have at the middle school, there won't be any moving. I'm at Chapin Middle, and I'm now going to go to Spring Hill. We have not planned that program yet because we're trying to balance these high Chapin numbers. However, the seats at Chapin Middle and Spring Hill Middle, they get more seats into Spring Hill High School now. So our plan was, whether it increases at Chapin Middle, we can handle it. But could we create almost a guaranteed flow that we can look at 2 years? If we have 2 sections in the 6th grade, 2 sections in the 7th grade, I can predict what's going to go into the 9th grade at Spring Hill High School. But if those numbers start to draw down, it would give us an opportunity. So it's not the guaranteed best. The best is to zone it, where you could predict exactly where they go. But in zoning that, we give up the Spring Hill way. So I wanted those schools and those administrations to give it a shot.
Right.
We would have a 2-year lead on knowing if this is not going to work. But I believe that they can. They built this program very strong. So I want to give them the opportunity to create that pathway.
Yeah, I understand that. I just am curious to know that's why I was
How it
asking
works,
when you're
yeah.
having the community sessions. I'm just
Amen.
curious to
Amen.
know what the thought process is on that, because it's just new. And you're right, it would be a lot easier to just rezone Spring Hill, and that would alleviate a lot of capacity concerns at Chapin. But I understand that Spring Hill is also, it's a unique school. So, that's part of, these are the conversations that we
These are
have
the
to have and balance, openly with everyone when we're talking about rezoning. There's not like a perfect, everyone can't be happy, and that's frustrating, I know. I see, Mr. Satterfield, I'm sorry. Mr.
Yes.
Satterfield.
Dr. Ross, what is the capacity at Spring Hill High School? And are we close to capacity?
Very good. I look at my team here because we have this conversation about capacity a lot. And we get pinned down on capacities, but I want to be clear. When you say capacity, there are 3 definitions for capacity.
Without portables.
Right. And every nuance of that changes. So let's start with MPSs. MPS is the firm we're working with now. Look to my team to correct me where I'm wrong here. The 3 definitions of capacity. The first is theoretical capacity. And we really not necessarily use that. If we're building a new building, for instance, Dutch Fork Elementary, we may use a theoretical capacity. We haven't programmed that building yet, so we'll say it holds 600. All right? The next one, what you're asking, is a maximum capacity.
Right.
Maximum capacity is what we think is, if I took every child as the same, what are we going to look at? We're going to say every room that can generate instruction, I'm going to put 25 students in there. And then
How about just program capacity?
right. And then you bring down to what we call target capacity,
Right.
what we actually programming that space for. Because you know that you can not all students are the same. I would not put 25 ED students in that room, or I would not put, if it's a Title I space, I'm not going to put 25 at all, I may put 18. So you know those numbers would change, and that changes the capacity. We use, and I say all of that to look at Dr. Harris to answer the question of how many, which are, I guess, max capacity at Spring Hill. Oh, we'll come back.
You still, well, let me just ask another question. I don't need to know exact numbers. I was just curious to know that if we are close, let's just say we're close, and we were talking about Chapin being at capacity, and Ms. Hines was asking, what if those students opt not to attend Spring Hill? After our last workshop, I got on my motorcycle and I was riding around Chapin, and I will tell you, I went down one road and there was plans for 150 new homes. And there are several areas being cleared. And once they get the infrastructure that can handle all those, there are more and more. You go down Old Lexington Highway area, and my goodness, it's just like it's ready to explode. And I was just curious, and I know this is a very difficult thing to plan for because the growth has been ridiculous out in the Chapin area, but if we are at max capacity at Chapin, would we just, and it got to that point to where, well, we got to put portables in, or do we increase the percentage of kids to Spring Hill, or do we rezone them? I'm just trying to figure out some way of alleviating that. I feel like Spring Hill is becoming the safety valve, so to speak, for this explosion that we see. And I watch the business news daily, and they were saying interest rates are coming down this year. There could be 2 to 3 decreases in interest rates, which mean more people will be buying homes. And anyway, I was just curious, what is your thought process on that with, if Chapin's at max and Spring Hill can handle a few more kids, but some of these neighborhoods do come to fruition and they do want to attend Chapin, what would we do then?
So we'll look at our options. And our options now, again, is you can immediately relieve Chapin by rezoning, but you would have to rezone in this map, and it would not sustain all of ours. In this plan that we have, in this plan, we relieve issues in the 5-year plan at the elementary, middle, and high. And this plan that we're currently in, you're really either or. You're not doing all. So it's still stopgaps. So for rezoning in this plan, you're going to have to come back because we got to find an answer for Chapin Middle. Chapin Middle is just as much of a concern for me as Chapin High School. So in last year's budget, we approved $1.5 million in portables, meaning that we knew last year we had missed the date. So we have to expand in portable classrooms. Portable classrooms shouldn't, depending on the age, maybe get you 23 in a class, depending on the site. Some we even pack to 25. So that's our plan until we can get a more permanent structure like this. But again, in the second option we have is to limit the number of seats that are coming into Spring Hill from Irmo and Dutch Fork. when you're doing this, you can't grandfather students in because or if you do, you don't create enough. So you're trying to limit or draw down all those seats to provide relief there. So we're considering those options. I'm voicing them loud, and I know people are listening and say, are they going to do that or going to do that? We're just being very open and honest about the conversations that we have. It is our goal to move in this space because, and let me share why. It is hard to move students to spaces, to new spaces. What's even harder is to make sure that the teachers and the certified staff are there when they get there. What's even harder is to make sure that the programs and the services are in place when they get to these new spaces. So for us, part of the deal of making this 26-27 is that we have enough time to plan are the programs, the services, the certifications, the spaces ready to receive the students in these new spaces. So, to answer that, there's so much more into just moving a child into a building. And so we think with this, that you're using the entire 25-26 school year. One of the principals said to me, she said, you need to use that year where we're meeting our new teachers, where we're going into those new spaces. We have a welcome to my new building night. You're meeting the principals. It's going to take all of that to break down that newness. But we recognize, as Chair Blackburn-Hines says, that if that plan doesn't work, we know what the piece is. But we would have a 2-year lead on that. So one of the reasons we would like a commitment on our plan after we get the feedback is it allows those principals now to actually go ahead and put those programs in place.
Ms. Huddle?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate I like the new slides. I think the whole color coding, it just makes it easier to understand the new
I
middle
think
schools.
communications and Courtney
Yeah,
Morabito.
it really is much easier to understand. I guess I have 2 points. One is I feel like we're kind of dancing around the elephant in the room, which is what's happening in Chapin. Lexington County showed us there are 900 home sites approved in LR5, and I believe all but one of them, one neighborhood is in the Chapin area. I would really like to see us have a whole separate discussion about that and what are the options. There's some high schools that have a freshman campus. Could we build a building as a freshman campus on the site of Chapin High School? Do we need a whole nother high school? God forbid, but I mean, if it's what we need, let's go in eyes open and not fool ourselves, and better yet, not fool the taxpayer into thinking that this is going to work, and then we're back 3 years later with, 4 years later. Because I understand the whole Spring Hill concept, but I hate that we're relying on what we think could happen. What if these kids don't want to go to Spring Hill's a very special place. So by the way, I love leaving it a magnet, but because it's a special place, there are kids who really want to go there, and there are kids who probably don't want to go there. And I hate to feel like we're banking everything on fixing Chapin on X number of kids wanting to go to Spring Hill. So I just want to say that I really feel like we've got to just tackle the whole Chapin growth issue, and I don't think the growth people knew about the home sites, so I don't think their estimates are valid. I think we've got to look at what's going on with the home sites, even ask county administration what else is coming, and look at that. And the other point I'd like to make is I am concerned about Dutch Fork Elementary School because we spent a ton of money on it, new windows, new HVAC, and I know some of that could be preserved, but my understanding is that the HVAC, because we talked about with the walls before, if we wanted to build walls in the 2 elementary schools that don't, we would have to redo the HVAC. So I believe that would probably have to be redone at Dutch Fork. If we need space for adult ed and the alternative academy, rather than redo an elementary school, would we be better off just building new space from scratch? It just seems like a waste to take everything that's configured for an elementary school and redo it. And it's a beautiful school. I realize it's old, but there's a lot of old buildings that are beautiful. And it also a little bit concerns me that we would rename it Richlex, but it wouldn't be K through 12. I'm all for renaming it Richlex, but I think that's more appropriate for K through 12. It goes more to its history. So at any rate, just kind of want to make those 2 points.
I want to start with the Chapin growth piece, and I think you're right. I think we have a 5-year plan, and as Dave Wiseman reminds me, once you finish your 5-year plan, you're working on the next 5-year plan. And I think if we would be fooling ourselves to think that in the 10-year plan, we don't have to have something else. What I don't want to do is take care of the 10-year plan and avoid the 5-year plan. Because in the 5-year plan, we have facility issues. A new high school, we were thinking about the cost, today's number. We would take care of one problem in Chapin and leave 2,640-something problems that we have in Dutch Fork and Irmo. That is a constant pressure on our operations team. And so I would like to get out of the 5-year plan with bringing all of these facilities at least to a 3. We are proposing, looking at different options outside of the 15-year financing, or in a 20-year financing that we would have some 8% capacity where we could look at, because we already said what you said, in the, I'm going to say the Somerville area of Chapin. I didn't know that was a space. There has to be some future space for either a elementary, middle school combo site or a high school combo. But I think if we can get the 5-year down, that'll be the next part of that 10-year plan to address. The second feature about Dutch Fork Elementary, and we'll have more and more conversations about that. When we look at its utilization and rebuilding that, I don't think, and from what we've talked about, our remodeling would make any of the energy efficiency work obsolete. I think it would be more central to our space, more central to our district. It's the exact pivot point between Piney Woods and Seven Oaks. But in talking with some alumni from Richlex, and not all of them, but some of Richlex, their school name doesn't even exist anymore. And I'd rather bring it back as an education center than it just not come back at all. So we'll be meeting with a lot more of them behind that functionality. I think you're right. We do need a new building. I'm going to say it's the district office. So I think that building has met its end. We have $10 million estimated to bring that back to I'm looking at you, Alan, not to just the code, but it doesn't address the current issues that we have in this space. So part of the things that we owe you, and you brought up a lot of these, is in our messaging, talking about capacity and the capacity numbers, phases of the capital, so we're still working through that. The poverty index, we wanted to make sure that if you look in our new map, seeing that how everybody feeds in, that we're considering not having one school where the poverty index is super high. And then you're right, as we talked about, what's that 10-year outlet? Because the elephant in the room is there is not a farm or a tree safe in Chapin, South Carolina. It is being cut down and there's development. So already we're seeing that our plans are there. So we know there is some risk with the current structure of a Spring Hill Middle, Spring Hill High feeder. But looking at the alternatives, that was the place that we wanted to start.
I'll say to Ms. Huddle's point, just in conversation, it concerns me to build another, you mentioned a ninth grade academy, which I've seen in different school districts, or to build another high school when we have Spring Hill that could be rezoned, which I know is not ideal. And I'm not saying that as like I'm in favor of rezoning Spring Hill, because I'm not. But to me, we have elementary schools in Irmo that just have, and throughout the district, we have so many other needs to say that we're going to add 2 new additional projects when we haven't even addressed all of the projects that were on the original, when we were talking about the bond issue a couple of years ago, we haven't addressed any of those issues. To bring in 2 new buildings, I'm just concerned that we're just not getting anything done. And we have a school, and where would we put it in Chapin? I just don't know. I don't know if those are things, I'm sure you've thought about it, those are concerns that I have with that. It's just I feel like we keep pushing this down the road, and nothing is getting done, and that's frustrating. I hear that. I don't know. And then I'll come to Mr. Hogan.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we do that. I'm not saying let's go build a new high school or let's build I'm just saying I think we ought to look at the numbers and look at all the alternatives. Can we add a wing on Chapin High School? Can we shift, a little bit of the line? I just think we need to go into it, and I would rather communicate with the public and say, and us as a board, these are the options we looked at. This is what we'd really love to be able to do, but maybe it's too expensive and we can't do it now. But we want you to know this is where it's going. We can't stop them from cutting all the trees and building all the houses. We have no power there. So I just feel like we have to go in and really look at it and let everybody know maybe this is phase 1 and phase 2 is coming, so that people don't think, because in the past these bond referendums have been kind of like, oh, we've done it all, we're fine. Well, if we don't address Chapin, we haven't done it all, we're not fine. So I just want us to look at the options and have a public discussion so that people know this isn't probably going to be the long-term solution for Chapin.
Right. Mr. Hogan.
Dr. Ross, I appreciate all the work you have done to put into this. A question I've got with a phrase we all use too often, the power's in the pivot, right? Yes, and as we're looking at how this potentially could develop, has there been any communication internally with potentially utilizing Spring Hill as a magnet and zone school to potentially cut some of the overcrowding at Chapin, to where if we've got the capacity where this wing's going to potentially open up, is that a topic of conversation, or could that be a potential pivot in the future?
So that was kind of our, without using the word zone, because that is I don't want to put you on the spot, Dr. Harris, we want to speak to the limitations on the zoning there.
Well, I'm not exactly sure the direction that you're headed, but I think in terms of your question, have we discussed Spring Hill being both a combination of a traditional school as well as a magnet school? And I think the short answer to that is not really in real detail. The strength of Spring Hill is in its current form and in its current capacity. And I think some of what I've heard Dr. Ross talk about, it has been recognized throughout the country for being just that. And we would hate to pretend that doesn't exist, no longer exists, and yet give them an opportunity to continue to do it, or continue to perform and continue to provide that level of instruction for students. We'd like to see that continue. So again, to the point that we heard, the lesser of the considerations was to keep it as a magnet and give opportunity in terms of eligibility. I think I heard you say, Ms. Blackburn has the word you used earlier, for those students in the Spring Hill Middle to feed into that, to kind of give us some relief at the Chapin site. So that became the lesser of all of the evils, quite frankly, in our conversations to date. Quick
follow-up on that, just so I guess at what point are we going to make a determination? Do we have a drastic change in the lines, or do we utilize Spring Hill as the zone school?
Yes, to Ms. Huddle's point, I think once the 5-year plan is in, we have, and I don't want to be held to this exactly, allow us to get the numbers like you said, but, and they're hearing this for the first time at Spring, but there is a point where at the 10-year plan, if we can't do this, the easier thing is to zone it. We wanted to give them that opportunity. That would create the 4th cluster. So Spring Hill Middle would flow right into Spring Hill. It would automatically relieve the pressure. That is the most inexpensive, effective use of our resources, is this to move to that piece. We were trying to keep its current flair, to keep its current, not saying that it still couldn't have choice or still be a magnet school, but it would drastically change how that school operates. So that is the kind of the parachute plan. It does not help the middle issues and the elementary issues that in that 10-year plan we would see. So there still would have to be a new building, but we think by dropping the populations of Chapin Middle and Spring Hill Middle, we have time to go after that. By bringing down and we really, when we look at where Chapin, Piney Woods, Lake Mary, and Ballantyne will be, by emptying out Ballantyne to draw down the Chapin schools, we buy us a little bit more time. Time we have to fix the Irmo and Dutch Fork schools. And then right after that, as you said, we're not done, but now we can go back. And if we use the 20-year financing options, we may have some capacity on debt service side to go after some new projects in Chapin. So when both wings are hurting, we want to repair both of them first, and then take on that new challenge there.
Mr. Scully.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with most of the comments up here, especially regarding, and I understand the issues with Chapin. I guess what I heard you say, and I just want to clarify, is Spring Hill Middle School under the proposal would be you described it as a choice school, and it would be only a choice for the Chapin cluster, or would Irmo and Dutch Fork students have the opportunity to go to Spring Hill Middle School?
Great clarification. Spring Hill Middle would only take in Lake Mary and Ballantyne. It would not be a choice school, to answer your question. It would only take in the Lake Mary and Ballantyne. That's so that we can bring those numbers down at the middle school and prepare for any unforeseen bumps into enrollment. Within Spring Hill Middle, we're proposing a school within a school that feeds right into Spring Hill High. We can't use the word zone, but it's a feed right into, and so when you look at scheduling, you have a schedule, and you have programs like ALA at Chapin, or the STEM program at Dutch Fork, or IB or Escalores. Those students move in a almost a feeding system through that. By having this feeder from 6th, 7th, and 8th, you can almost see the numbers that even though they're zoned at Chapin High, you already know because they're in this program, they're relieving that pressure at Chapin because they're basically choosing to go or choosing to feed into Spring Hill. But there would not be, Spring Hill Middle would only feed Lake Murray and Ballantyne Elementary students.
So do those feeder programs, do they exist today at other schools?
They do not.
Okay, so I guess I do agree with the skepticism, I guess, about filling the 300 additional spots in Spring Hill, expecting that many Chapin students to cross over to go to Spring Hill, because it is true, in my opinion, that those two student bodies are unique but very different. And each of them, the kids that go to Chapin High School love Chapin High School, and they want to go to Chapin High School, and the ones that go to Spring Hill love Spring Hill, but they're very different and very unique. So I'm not sure, I can't see if they're not already on that pathway to cross over. And the other thing that just want to, and I know the numbers don't dictate it, so I'm really just making it more difficult by complaining. But I know you said that the anticipated enrollments from the Dutch Fork and Irmo clusters at Spring Hill, the number of seats will stay static. But if those clusters are also growing in population and student body, then really it's kind of misleading to think that it's static as far as the number of seats, but because the percentage of students being able to go to Spring Hill will then decrease. And so I know we currently already have students, at least I feel I remember knowing students who applied from those clusters already to get into Spring Hill, and they've been turned down. So if we're already having to turn down students from the Irmo and Dutch Fork areas, it's only going to, that much more are going to be affected, as those clusters grow in population. But I know it's a numbers game, so I don't really have a suggestion. I just know that those communities also want the opportunities.
That's very fair, and it's a great question to ask because it's one that comes up when we talk. I don't know exactly how many seats we get from Dutch Fork and Irmo. Do you know?
I don't know the exact number, but I will say the consideration, Mr. Scully, is that we currently operate with somewhat of a cap at Spring Hill High School to kind of keep the grade levels balanced, and that consideration would be that we would take a second look at that in order to accommodate those additional students that we are referring to. So that is one way how we would look at those three, maybe a little bit more than 300 students. That's how we would accommodate them into the Spring Hill High School by taking a second look at the current cap that we currently use and kind of operate under as it relates to the application process.
Okay.
It would also be helpful if we had if there's a waiting list, like knowing what those waiting list numbers are based off of cluster. I mean, as we're looking at this, that would also help identify some of the questions we have about interest.
Yeah, and thank you.
Sorry,
I agree.
go ahead.
The last thing I'm going to pitch is, any chance we can revisit option, was it 3, an additional $100 million in the bond referendum for $60 a household. I understand nobody wants to think that way, but that's cheaper money. But anyway, I'll just put that back up. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Mr. Satterfield?
Yeah, I was just going to point out one thing that I know Dr. Ross was thinking about we like it, Spring Hill being a magnet, because then they do not have to have a football stadium and they do not have to have all those extracurricular activities. So the students that go from these various schools can still go back and participate. But
and that
that's
was
an important part of high school experience.
That was the last consideration that I was going to bring up. One of the reasons that we will still have, regardless of what we do, we still have the issues of those schools in Irmo and Dutch Fork. Any decision that we make that takes care of one part of our community and doesn't take care of the other, we're going to have to live with that. To make Spring Hill a zone school, you want to give it its full complement of arts and athletics and everything else that exists there. An athletic package at a high school is pretty pricey right now, and all of those funds go away from bringing those schools in the Dutch Fork and Irmo area up. So what we were doing in our deliberation is, regardless of what decision, but if we could try this, we have a 2-year lead time on if it works or not. But every year in capital, and I know Ms. Wilkinson is going to throw something at me, but we would slowly build out the packages, slowly build out the tennis courts 1 year, then add in a track another year. And so in 5 years, you've built that out to when we get to Ms. Huddle's point of tackling the elephant in the room, it is built out fully. I know sometimes we talk in open, so people hear this and say, well, what's the plan? Is that the plan? just know that there is no set plan until the board decides. And I'm just asking that we have open conversations, we do community feedback, we'll put our community feedback out. We are, as a community, building this plan, and we're talking in the open. And so, but I would ask this, that somewhere in that April 22nd meeting, if we'll bring back in February and March all of our thoughts and maybe workshop, so that we can have enough time to communicate what the actual plan is.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Ross.
Thank you.
All right. Does that conclude the superintendent's?
That concludes the superintendent's report. Thank you.